My son pointed a finger in my face and screamed, "You don't pay rent. You don't live here." I stared at him from my armchair, without a word. I placed a thick envelope on the coffee table between us. He thought it was a check for $500, but he was wrong. It was a notice to vacate. This house had never belonged to him. My name is Elise Hartman. I sat in the faded velvet armchair in the corner of the living room, a space that used to be my sanctuary before it became a battleground. Outside, the wind howled through the suburbs of Rockridge, Colorado, but the storm inside was far worse. My son, Jason, paced back and forth on the rug I had bought 10 years ago. He was 35 years old, but right now, he looked like a petulant child throwing a tantrum because things were not going his way. $2,000 on credit card interest alone, Jason shouted, waving a crumpled statement in the air. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "We are drowning here. Brittany. Drowning Brittany." My daughter-in-law of 5 years sat on the sofa with her legs crossed. She looked at me with that practiced expression of concern she reserved for when she wanted to manipulate the situation. "Honey, calm down," Brittany said softly, though her eyes were hard as flint when they flickered toward me. "It is just... well, we have extra expenses. A lot of extra expenses." Jason stopped pacing. He turned slowly to face me. The vein in his neck was throbbing. I remained silent, my hands folded in my lap, watching the boy I had raised turn into a stranger. "She is right." Jason spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You do not pay a single dime for this house. Mom, you just sit there. You do not pay rent. You do not live here forever." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Brittany sighed, smoothing her skirt. "Jason means well." "Elise," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It is just that. We need our space. Boundaries are healthy. Maybe it is time to look at that facility in North Rockridge, the one with the better welfare benefits." I looked from one to the other. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg or offer to dip into my meager pension to cover their mistakes. Instead, I stood up. My knees popped audibly, and my hands trembled slightly, a betrayal of my 62 years, but my gaze remained steady. I did not say a word. I simply turned and walked down the hallway to my bedroom, leaving a heavy, confused silence in my wake. Inside my room, I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand. I reached past the old photo albums and retrieved a thick manila envelope. It was heavy in my hand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the motherly instinct that wanted to protect him, and walked back out. When I re-entered the living room, they were whispering. They stopped abruptly as I approached. I did not return to my chair. Instead, I walked straight to the coffee table and dropped the envelope in front of Jason. It landed with a solid thud. "You are right," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the tension like a knife. "If you do not pay, you do not stay. So, read this." Jason looked at the envelope, then at me. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He likely thought it was a check. Maybe $5,000 from my savings, an apology tax. He tore open the flap with greedy fingers. But there was no check. He pulled out a stack of crisp, stapled documents. The first page was a property deed. The second was a trust agreement. The third, printed on stark white paper, bore the title in bold, black letters, "Notice to Vacate." Jason froze. He squinted at the papers, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of the legal jargon. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice losing its earlier volume. "Mom, what is this?" Read the name on the deed. "Jason," I said coldly. He flipped the page. Brittany leaned in. Her face, pale. "Elise Hartman," Brittany whispered, reading over his shoulder. "Sole owner. Trustee of the Hartman Living Trust." She looked up at me, panic flaring in her eyes. "Wait. Where is Jason's name? You said we owned this." "I never said that." I replied. "You assumed it." Jason looked up, the color draining from his face. "But I pay the utilities. I put in the new porch light. And you have lived here rent-free for 3 years." I interrupted. "You thought you were letting me stay in your house." "No." I took a step closer, looking down at them as they huddled over the undeniable truth of their situation. "This house was never yours," I said, enunciating every word. "And starting today, you are officially the one living here without paying rent." The room went deathly silent. Brittany scrambled to find her name on the trust documents, but she found nothing, just my name, and the name of my attorney. I turned around and sat back down in my armchair. I crossed my legs and watched them unravel. They thought this was a sudden outburst, a reaction to his insults. They had no idea. I had prepared these papers 6 months ago. I had just been waiting for him to say the magic words. "You don't pay rent. You don't live here. Game on, son." To understand how a mother could hand her own son an eviction notice, you have to go back to the beginning. It did not happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet erosion, like water wearing down a stone until it finally cracks. 3 years ago, my life was peaceful. I had just retired after 35 years of working as a nurse at Helio Vista Medical Center. My husband had been gone for 8 years, and while the silence in the house was sometimes heavy, it was my silence. I lived alone in the 2-story wooden house we had bought decades ago. The mortgage finally paid off. Every beam and floorboard settled into a familiar rhythm. I had my garden, my books, and the comfort of knowing that the roof over my head was entirely mine. Then came the phone call. I remember Jason's voice, tight with stress. He and Brittany were struggling with the soaring rent prices in the city centre. "It is just for a few months." "Mom?" Jason had said, his voice cracking slightly. "Just until we get back on our feet. We will help pay the bills." "I promise." I hesitated. I was used to my solitude, but then I thought of Lily, my granddaughter, who was only 5 years old at the time. I thought about her small hands and her laugh, and the idea of having her fill the empty rooms was too tempting to resist. I told myself that family does not count pennies. I told myself it was the right thing to do. "Come home," I told him. In the beginning, it was wonderful. The house felt alive again. I cooked dinner every night, happy to have mouths to feed. Jason spent a weekend fixing a leak in the roof that I had been ignoring. Brittany brought me bouquets of wildflowers and posted photos of us on her social media, captioning them. "The most wonderful woman in the world." We were a team, or so I thought. But the definition of temporary began to stretch. 3 months turned into 6. 6 months turned into a year. The topic of them moving out simply vanished from conversation, replaced by a comfortable complacency. The utility bills skyrocketed with 3 adults and a child in the house. But whenever they arrived, Jason and Brittany seemed to be busy or short on cash. So, I paid them. I paid the water, the electricity, and the internet. As long as the family is close, I would whisper to myself while writing out the checks. That is what matters. Then, the subtle changes began. It started with the furniture. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find the living room rearranged. My husband's old leather recliner, the one he had sat in every evening for 20 years, was gone. "Where is the chair?" I asked, standing in the doorway with my grocery bags. Brittany smiled, wiping her hands on a rag. "Oh, Elise. We moved it to the garage. It was just... Well, it looked a bit cluttered in here. It does not really match the modern aesthetic we are going for." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I did not want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I let my husband's chair sit in the cold, dusty garage. Then came the comments about the food. Jason would come home tired and say, "Mom, you do not need to cook so much. We can just order takeout. It is faster." Yet, when the smell of pot roast or lasagna filled the kitchen, they would sit down and eat 2 or 3 helpings, never offering to pay for the groceries I had hauled home. It became an expectation, a natural resource they felt entitled to exploit. The worst moments were disguised as compliments. One evening, while I was washing the dishes after a dinner I had cooked and paid for, Brittany leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You are so lucky because you have us here to take care of you. Elise," she said, without looking up. "Most people your age are so lonely." I stopped scrubbing a plate. I was the one waking up at 6 in the morning to get Lily ready for school. I was the one cleaning the bathrooms. I was the one paying the bills. And yet, in their narrative, they were the saviors. I began to feel like a guest in my own home, a silent lodger who had overstayed her welcome in a house I had owned for 30 years. I walked softly on the floorboards I had paid for. I kept my opinions to myself to avoid conflict. I was terrified that if I spoke up, if I pointed out the unfairness, the fragile peace would shatter, and I would lose my son and granddaughter. So, I stayed silent. And that silence was the mistake that cost me everything before I finally decided to take it all back. If the first 2 years were a slow erosion, the 3rd year was a landslide. The air in the house grew thick with unspoken resentments that eventually found their voice. And when they did, they were not kind. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was watching a documentary in the living room, volume low, when Brittany walked in. She stood in front of the television, crossing her arms. "Elise, we need to set some house rules," she said, her voice tight. "Jason works hard. He needs to decompress when he gets home. From now on, no TV in the living room after 8 o'clock at night. We need this space to be quiet." I looked at the television. I had bought that flat screen with my Christmas bonus 4 years ago. But this is where I relax too, I said softly. "Well, maybe you could get a small TV for your room," she replied, shrugging. "We just need boundaries." The boundaries kept closing in. A week later, I opened the refrigerator to get some creamer for my coffee. There, stuck to a carton of almond milk and a block of cheddar cheese, were neon pink sticky notes. In Brittany's sharp handwriting, they read, "Ours. Do not touch." I stared at the notes. Beside them sat the 2 gallons of regular milk, the carton of eggs, and the bag of spinach I had bought yesterday with my pension money. Those had no notes. Those were apparently for everyone. I closed the fridge door gently, but my hands were shaking. Then came the complaints about my very existence in the house. One morning, Brittany sighed loudly over her coffee. I barely slept last night, she said, glaring at her mug. Elise, when you get up to use the bathroom at night, it sounds like a herd of elephants. The floorboards creak so loud. I try to be quiet, I said. Feeling a flush of embarrassment heat my cheeks. You know, Brittany said, her tone shifting to fake solicitude. My friend's mother just moved into Oak River Senior Community. It is so peaceful there. No stairs. Thick carpets. Maybe it is something to think about, for your own comfort. Of course. I looked at Jason, hoping he would defend me, hoping he would say, "This is her house. She can walk however she wants." Instead, he refused to meet my eyes. Brittany has a point. Mum, we need our privacy too. Sometimes it feels like we are living in a fishbowl. It is hard for a young couple to grow when they do not have their own space. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Their own space. The delusion ran deeper than I realized. A few days later, I was walking past the spare bedroom Jason used as an office. The door was ajar. I heard him laughing on the phone with a friend. Yeah, man. It is going well, Jason said. We are basically paying the mortgage at this point, so it is as good as ours. Mom. Well, she is just sort of there. She needs to understand who is really running things. I froze in the hallway, paying the mortgage. The mortgage had been paid off in full 8 years ago. I had the letter from the bank in my safe. He was lying to his friends, and perhaps to himself to bolster his ego. He was rewriting reality to make himself the owner, and me, the burden. The tension finally snapped over a glass of red wine. It was a Friday night. I was moving from the kitchen to the dining room, and I tripped over one of Lily's toys scattered on the floor. The wine splashed onto the new beige area rug Brittany had insisted on buying. "Oh my God!" Brittany shrieked, rushing over. "Elise, do you know how much this cost? We pooled our money for this. It was $200. I am so sorry," I stammered, reaching for a towel. "I will clean it." "Stop!" she snapped, pushing my hand away. "If you do not contribute financially to this household, the least you can do is not destroy the things we buy." I looked at Jason. He was standing there, watching his wife berate his mother. "She is right. Mom," he said, his voice cold. "You live here for free. You eat our food. You use our utilities. Everyone who lives here should contribute something. It is just basic economics." My heart hammered against my ribs. Free. I looked after Lily every day from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. I cleaned. I cooked. In their eyes, my labor was worth exactly $0, but the final blow came 3 days later. Jason was holding the electric bill. It was summer, and the air conditioning had been running high. $300, Jason shouted, slamming the paper onto the kitchen counter. He turned on me, his face red with misplaced rage. "Why is this so high? You keep the lights on all day when we are at work. Don't you?" I read in the living room, I said, my voice trembling. "It gets dark." "Then open a window," he yelled. "I am sick of carrying everyone on my back. I am sick of paying for everything." He leaned in close, his eyes wide and furious. "You do not pay rent. Mom." He screamed, the words echoing off the walls. "You do not pay rent. You do not live here forever." Something inside me broke, but it was not a break that led to tears. It was a clean, sharp break, like a bone snapping to set itself stronger. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the son I adored had been replaced by a man who viewed me as a liability on a balance sheet. I stopped trying to keep the peace. In that silence, I started planning my war. That night, the house was silent, but my mind was screaming. I waited until the digital clock on my nightstand read 2 o'clock in the morning before I slipped out of bed. The floorboards, which Brittany had complained about so bitterly, seemed to conspire with me this time, remaining silent as I crept into the study. I needed proof. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the old oak filing cabinet. My hands shook, not from age, but from adrenaline. I pulled out the original deed to the house. There it was. In black and white, Elise Hartman. No other names. Jason was listed only on a separate document I had signed years ago, authorizing him to receive mail at this address so he could get his packages delivered safely while he was at work. He had twisted that simple kindness into a claim of ownership. I spent the next hour sifting through the pile of mail Jason usually snatched up the moment it arrived. I found envelopes from banks I did not bank with. There were letters from credit card companies and a terrifying red-bordered envelope from a collection agency addressed to Jason. I held it up to the moonlight. It was a final notice for a debt of $5,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. I needed to know more. I walked into the kitchen. Jason's laptop was sitting open on the island, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. He had forgotten to shut it down. I touched the trackpad, and the screen brightened. My breath hitched. He had an email open. The subject line read, "Application Update, Home Equity Line of Credit." I leaned closer, squinting at the glowing text. He was trying to take out a loan of $50,000 using my home as collateral. He had listed himself as the primary resident and owner. My stomach turned. He was not just living off me. He was trying to mortgage my future to pay for his mistakes. I went back to my room and opened my own tablet. I navigated to the county clerk's website, my fingers typing rapidly. I searched for property records under my address. There was a recent entry, a rejected application for a lien. The reason for rejection was listed clearly, missing signature of legal owner, Elise Hartman. He had actually tried to sell me out from under my own roof, and the only thing that had stopped him was a bureaucrat checking a signature. But the betrayal did not stop at the bank. I opened Instagram. I had created an account months ago just to see pictures of Lily, but now I typed in Brittany's handle. There it was. A photo of my front porch, the one I had painted by hand with my late husband. The caption read, "Finally building our own home base. So blessed to be homeowners at 32 New Chapter Home Sweet Home." I scrolled down, comment after comment, congratulated them. "So proud of you guys," one friend wrote. "Hard work pays off," wrote another. Brittany had liked every single one. She was living a fantasy life online using the bricks and mortar of my reality. Then, a suggested post caught my eye. It was a link to a rental site. I clicked it, and my blood ran cold. The listing was titled Cozy Private Room near Rocky Ridge Park. The photo was of my library, my reading chair, my books. The host was listed as Brittany. I sat back, feeling dizzy. I thought back to the last 2 months. There had been 3 weekends where Brittany claimed she was going to visit her parents in Texas. She had told me, "Jason is busy with work, but my friend from college is coming to town. Do you mind if she stays in the guest room since I will be away?" I had cooked breakfast for those friends. I had changed the sheets for them. I had welcomed them into my home, thinking I was being a gracious host to Brittany's circle. I checked the dates on the rental calendar. They matched perfectly with her Texas trips. Those people were not friends. They were paying customers. Brittany and Jason were pocketing $300 a weekend, renting out a room in my house, while I played the unpaid maid. I reached for a notebook and a pen. I opened it to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Item 1. Attempted mortgage fraud. Item 2. Unauthorized Airbnb rental. Item 3. False claims of ownership on social media. I wrote down every date I could remember. I listed the grocery bills I had paid when they promised to transfer the money, later transfers that never came. I listed the electric bill Jason had screamed at me about. You do not pay rent. I whispered the words to myself in the darkness. They were right. I did not pay rent. I paid for everything else. And now, I was going to make sure they paid for this. They were trying to bind me to their debts, to sink me along with their ship. I closed the notebook with a snap. I was not just a grandmother anymore. I was a woman building a case. The next morning, I did not make breakfast. I did not brew the coffee. I dressed in my best navy blue suit, the one I used to wear for hospital board meetings, and drove straight to downtown Rockridge. I sat across from Daniel Rhodes in his small, wood-panelled office. Daniel was a specialist in elder law and property rights, a man who had known my husband. I laid everything out on his desk, the deed, the rejected loan application, and my notebook filled with dates and times. Daniel pushed his glasses up his nose, his expression darkening as he read the email I had printed out. Elise, this is serious, Daniel said, tapping the paper with his index finger. Jason has absolutely no legal claim to your property. Attempting to use your home as collateral without your consent, that is fraud. If he had forged your signature, he would be looking at prison time. I do not want him in prison. Daniel? I said, my voice steady. I just want him out of my house. Or at least, I want him to know whose house it is. We can do that. Daniel replied. We spent the next 2 hours constructing my fortress. We established the Hartman Living Trust. I signed the papers designating myself as the sole beneficiary and trustee. We added a specific clause. No liens, loans, or encumbrances may be placed on the property without the notarized signature of the trustee. It was a legal iron dome over my home. Next, I went to the bank. I did not go to our usual branch where the tellers knew Jason. I went to a competitor across the street. I opened a new account solely in my name and transferred every penny of my savings into it. Then, I revoked the power of attorney I had granted Jason 5 years ago for convenience. Are you sure you want to remove him from all access? The banker asked, looking concerned. I am positive, I said. Cut the cord. Back at Daniel's office, he handed me 2 documents. The first was a notice to quit. It was a formal eviction notice for a tenant at will, giving Jason and Brittany 30 days to vacate the premises. The second document was a residential lease agreement. This is your leverage, Daniel explained. If you decide to let them stay, they sign this. They pay market rent. They follow your rules. If they refuse, the notice to quit stands. I took the papers. They felt heavier than paper should. That afternoon, I called Nora. She lived in a spacious apartment in a senior independent living community. Nora. I might need a favor, I said, keeping my voice low as I sat in my car. If things get ugly at home, can I crash on your sofa for a night or 2? You know my door is always open, Nora said instantly. Is it Jason? It is. I replied. But do not worry. I am handling it. When I got home, the house was empty. I took out a floor plan I had sketched. I moved through the rooms, marking the items that were non-negotiable: my husband's watch, the silver tea set, my grandmother's quilt. I quietly moved these items into small, nondescript cardboard boxes and stacked them in the back of the garage, hidden behind the lawnmower. If they decided to fight dirty and destroy things, my heart would be safe. My final stop was the house next door. Frank was sweeping his porch. He was a retired police officer, a man of few words but deep loyalty. "Frank," I said, leaning over the fence, "I need to ask you something. If you hear shouting from my house in the next few days, just listen." Frank stopped sweeping. "Everything okay?" "Elise." "Not really," I admitted. "Jason told me I do not pay rent, so I cannot live there. I am about to correct him. If the police get called, I need a witness to say that they threatened to kick me out first." Frank nodded slowly. "I will be on my porch. I have got your back." That night, long after Jason and Brittany had gone to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen. The only light came from the small lamp over the stove. I spread the documents out on the granite countertop, the counter I had paid for, in the house I owned. I uncapped my pen and signed the final page of the trust agreement. The ink was black and permanent. "You said if I do not pay rent, I do not get to live here." I whispered to the empty room, feeling a cold resolve settle in my chest. "Fair enough. Now I will make you understand what it truly means to not be allowed to live here." The countdown began on a Wednesday evening. Jason burst through the front door, his face flushed with the kind of manic energy that usually preceded a financial disaster. He tossed his keys into the bowl and clapped his hands together. "This is it." "Mom," Jason announced, pacing the kitchen floor. "The big one. I have finally got a meeting with Northbridge Data Ventures. 2 partners are coming here. To this house. This Saturday." I stood by the sink, drying a plate. "Here?" I asked. "Yes, here." He gestured widely at the walls. "They want to see the man behind the code. They want to see stability. A family man with a solid asset. If I land this deal, we are talking about $500,000 in seed funding." Brittany immediately sprang into action, her eyes lighting up with the reflection of imaginary money. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. "We need a dinner party," Brittany declared, not looking at me but speaking at me. "Something impressive but homey. Roast duck. No. Maybe a prime rib? Elise, you can make that herb-crusted rib you did for Christmas 2 years ago. Right. And we will need appetizers for 12 people. Oh, and the baseboards in the hallway need scrubbing." She did not ask. She ordered. In her mind, the hierarchy was set. Jason was the CEO, she was the First Lady, and I was the staff. I hesitated, letting my hand tremble slightly as I set the plate down. I lowered my head, feigning submission. I will try my best," I said, making my voice sound thin and weary. "My back has been hurting lately, but I will try. Just get it done." "Mom," Jason said distractedly, already texting. "This has to be perfect." Inside, my heart was beating with a cold, steady rhythm. Perfect, I thought. Oh, it will be perfect. I wasn't planning a dinner. I was planning an execution. The next day, the house became a stage for their delusion. I heard Brittany on the phone in the living room. "Mom, Dad. You have to come up from Texas," she squealed. "Jason is closing a massive deal. We are finally going to be real homeowners." Like, officially rich. Come see the start of our empire. I gripped the banister of the stairs. Real homeowners. She was inviting her parents to witness her victory lap on a track she didn't own. Later that afternoon, I walked past Jason's office. He was on a video call, leaning back in his chair with his feet up on the desk. Look, the tech is solid, he was saying to a friend, and my personal life is rock solid. I have got the house, the equity, the whole suburban dream. The investors love that stability. It proves I am not a flight risk. He was using my home, the walls I had paid for with 30 years of nursing shifts, as a prop to sell his lie. I moved silently to my bedroom. I pulled a suitcase from the back of my closet, but I didn't pack clothes. I packed the things that couldn't be replaced. I took the framed photo of my husband and me in Hawaii. I took my mother's pearl necklace. I took the folder containing my will and the new trust documents. I waited until Brittany left for her Pilates class and Jason was in the shower. Then, I carried the boxes out to the garage and locked them in the trunk of my car. I drove a small load over to Nora's apartment. Keep these safe, I told her. Just in case. You think he will get violent? Nora asked, her eyes wide. I think a man who lies to himself this much will do anything when the mirror breaks. I replied, by Friday. I was fully committed to my role. I played the part of the fading matriarch. I dropped a spoon in the kitchen and let out a confused sigh. I asked Jason the same question 3 times in an hour. Mum? Get it together? Jason snapped when I asked him what time the guests were arriving for the second time. I cannot have you acting senile in front of the investors. I am sorry. Son, I murmured, wiping a non-existent speck of dust from the counter. I am just so tired. It worked. They stopped watching me. They stopped suspecting me. They saw a harmless old woman, not a threat. On the morning of the party, I called Daniel. Is everything ready? I asked. The notice to quit is notarized. Daniel's voice came through the phone, crisp and professional. I will bring the original copy. I have arranged for a process server to be with me, just to keep it official. And Elise, if you want police presence, say the word. Just have them on standby. I said, I want to do this face-to-face first. That night, the eve of the party. The house was quiet. The smell of the expensive cleaning products Brittany had made me use lingered in the air. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the street lamp, casting long shadows on the driveway. A wave of nausea hit me. Was I really going to do this? Was I going to humiliate my son in front of his investors, his in-laws, and his wife? It felt cruel. It felt unnatural for a mother to destroy her child's dreams. Then, the memory of his voice from the fight echoed in my mind, louder than my guilt. You don't pay rent. You don't live here. He had already evicted me from his heart. He had already reduced me to a squatter in his life. I wasn't breaking the family. I was just sweeping up the pieces he had already smashed. Game over. Jason, I whispered to the glass. Tomorrow. The landlord comes to collect. The Saturday morning sun hit the kitchen counter at 7 o'clock sharp, illuminating the emptiness where a 20-pound prime rib should have been thawing. I was up, but I was not wearing my apron. Instead, I buttoned my wool coat and picked up my leather handbag. Jason walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked at the empty stove, then at me. Mom, you better get that meat in the oven. He mumbled, pouring coffee. The guys are coming at 5. I am going to see the doctor for a bit. I lied smoothly. My voice steady. My blood pressure is acting up. I will be back by noon to help. Jason waved a dismissive hand. Fine. Just hurry back. Do not mess this up. He did not even look at me. He was too busy scrolling through his talking points on his tablet. I walked out the door, got into my sedan, and drove straight to Daniel's office. When I arrived, Daniel handed me a crisp blue legal folder. "Everything is in order," he said, his eyes serious behind his glasses. "Remember, you need to hand it to him directly, and having a witness is crucial. I have Frank," I said. "He is ready." By the time I returned to the house, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I parked down the street and waited. I could imagine the scene inside. Brittany would be realizing right about now that the oven was cold. I walked up the driveway just as a silver Lexus pulled up. Brittany's parents, the Millers, stepped out. Her father, a man who wore too much cologne and not enough humility, looked up at the house. Nice place. He boomed, clapping Jason on the back as my son came out to greet them. "So, when do you kids officially get the deed? You said you were refinancing to put it in your name." "Right." I stood behind a large oak tree, listening. "Soon, Dad. Soon." Jason laughed nervously, just waiting on some paperwork. "Well, it is about time." Brittany's mother chimed in, adjusting her pearls. "You two deserve a real asset, not just, living with family." They walked inside, oblivious to the fact that the owner of that asset was standing 10 feet away, at 4 o'clock, an hour earlier than expected. A black SUV pulled up. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out. The investors from Northbridge Data Ventures. I saw Jason run to the door, his face pale. He was sweating. I knew why. There was no smell of roasting meat. There were no appetizers. The house was a stage with no props. I waited 5 more minutes. Then, I texted Frank now. I walked to the front door. I did not use my key. I opened it like a guest. The living room was thick with tension. Brittany was in the kitchen, frantically arranging crackers on a plate because there was nothing else. Jason was trying to charm the investors, but his laugh was high and brittle. "And this," Jason was saying, sweeping his arm around the room, "is the living room. Open concept. Great equity in this neighborhood." I stepped into the archway. I was not carrying grocery bags. I was holding the blue folder against my chest. "Mom," Jason hissed, rushing over to me, keeping his voice low so the investors wouldn't hear. "Where have you been? Where is the food?" Brittany is freaking out. I walked past him. I walked right into the center of the room, to the large dining table where everyone was standing awkwardly. "I am sorry, gentlemen," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "There will be no dinner tonight." The room went silent. Brittany stormed out of the kitchen, her face red. Elise. "What are you doing?" she whispered aggressively. "You are embarrassing us." I said calmly, "I am clarifying things." I placed the blue folder on the table. It made a sharp slap against the wood. "Before we eat," I continued, looking straight at the investors, "we need to settle the matter of who actually lives and pays rent in this house." Frank stepped through the front door then, wearing his old police jacket. He stood silently by the entrance, arms crossed. I picked up the document from the folder and held it out to Jason. "Jason Hartman," I said formally, "this is a notice to quit. You and your wife have 30 days to vacate my property." Jason stared at the paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. what one of the investors asked. Frowning, I thought, Jason, I thought you owned this property. You listed it as your primary asset for the collateral. He does not, I said, turning to the man. I am the sole owner, and he is being evicted for failure to pay rent and attempted fraud. Mum? Jason gasped, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. Mum? Please. What is going on? Brittany's father shouted, stepping forward. What is this? Notice with cause. You cannot kick them out. Actually, I can... I replied, not breaking eye contact with my son. Brittany asked what I was doing. I am doing exactly what you told me to do. Jason, you said if I do not pay rent, I do not live here. Well, neither do you. Brittany let out a shriek that shattered the last remnant of their facade. Are you crazy? You are ruining everything. The chaos I had predicted erupted instantly, but I stood still in the center of it, the eye of the storm, watching the house of cards finally collapse. Stop, my voice cracked through the chaotic noise of the living room like a whip. Everyone froze, the investors, my in-laws, my son, and his wife. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at the small, terrified face peering through the banisters at the top of the stairs. Nora is waiting in her car outside, I said, pointing a finger at Brittany. Take Lily to her. Now, Nora will take her for ice cream. Elise, we are in the middle of... Brittany started to protest, her face flushed and ugly with rage. Do it. I interrupted, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is adult business. Children should not witness this. Do not make me ask you again. Brittany looked at the investors, then at her parents, and finally scrambled up the stairs. A few moments later, she carried a confused Lily out the front door. I waited until I saw Nora's car pull away from the curb through the window before I turned back to the room. I pulled out a chair at the head of the dining table and sat down. Sit, I told Jason. He collapsed into the chair opposite me. The two investors remained standing, their expressions shifting from confusion to cold suspicion. Brittany's parents huddled together near the sideboard as if seeking shelter. I opened the blue folder again. I laid the first document in the center of the table. This is the deed to this house, I said clearly. It is held in the Hartman Living Trust. I am the sole beneficiary. There is no mortgage. There is no co-owner. One of the investors, a tall man with greying hair, picked up the paper. He scanned it and then looked at Jason with eyes like ice. You told us the title transfer was in process, the investor said. You used this property as proof of asset stability for the seed funding. You said you were just waiting on the paperwork. I was going to... Jason stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It is complicated. Family stuff. It is not complicated, I said. I pulled out the second sheet of paper, the printout of the email. It is fraud. I slid the paper toward Brittany's father. 3 months ago, Jason applied for a home equity line of credit for $50,000 using this house as collateral. I explained. He tried to do it without my knowledge. The only reason it failed was because he could not forge my signature well enough. What Brittany's mother gasped, clutching her chest. Jason, you tried to take out a loan, but... You said the business was fully self-funded. Brittany walked back into the room just in time to hear this. She looked at the paper, her eyes widening. You tried to mortgage the house, she whispered. You never told me that. Oh, do not act innocent. Brittany, I said, turning to gaze on her. She bristled. her defensive instincts kicking in. This is ridiculous. You are just doing this to humiliate us. You are vindictive because you feel pushed out of the family. You are just a bitter old woman. I reached into the folder for the third time. I produced the screenshot of the Airbnb listing. The photo of my library was undeniable. If I am so bitter, I said, sliding the photo across the polished wood. Why did you turn my library into a hotel room? Cozy private room near Rocky Ridge Park. Host Brittany. The room went deadly silent. You told me you were visiting your parents in Texas, I said, my voice shaking slightly with the memory of the betrayal. But you were actually staying at a friend's house while strangers slept in my home. You made $300 a weekend, and you did not even buy toilet paper. Brittany's father looked at the screenshot, then at his daughter. His face turned a deep, beet red. You were renting out your mother-in-law's house, he asked, his voice thick with shame. And you posted on Facebook that this was your home base that you built. This Jason put his head in his hands. The investors exchanged a look, and without a word. The tall one placed his business card on the table, then picked it up again and put it back in his pocket. I think we have seen enough, the investor said. Mr. Hartman, we will not be moving forward with the deal. Do not contact us again. They walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush the furniture. Mom? Jason's voice was broken, muffled by his hands. Mom, I am sorry. Sorry does not pay the bills. Jason? I said. And it certainly does not fix fraud. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. You have two choices, I stated, looking down at them. Choice 1. You sign a residential lease agreement. The rent is $2,500 a month, which is fair market value for this area. You pay your own utilities. You respect my space. If you miss a payment, you are out. Jason looked up, tears streaming down his face. $2,500, we cannot afford that. Then you have choice 2, I said, pointing to the notice to quit. You accept the eviction. You have 30 days to pack your things and leave. Brittany opened her mouth to argue, likely to claim that I needed them, that I couldn't live alone in this big house. But I was ready for that, too. And before you think you can manipulate me by saying I will be lonely, I added, delivering the final blow, you should know something. I have already placed a deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment at the Oak River Senior Community. It is near the park. It is quiet. I leaned in closer, my voice hard as stone. If you do not sign the lease, I will rent this entire house to a nice family who will actually pay me. I will move out. This house will become my income, not my burden. So decide, right now. Do you want to be my tenants, or do you want to be homeless? The silence that descended on the house after the investors left was heavier than the noise of the confrontation. It was a suffocating, physical weight. The front door had clicked shut 20 minutes ago. Brittany's parents had corralled their daughter into the guest bedroom, the one she had rented out to strangers, and closed the door firmly to have a family discussion that sounded more like an interrogation. That left Jason and me alone in the kitchen. The recessed lighting cast long, harsh shadows across the granite countertops. Jason sat on one of the high stools, his shoulders slumped forward, his head in his hands. He looked stripped down, raw. The arrogance of the tech CEO was gone. The bravado of the homeowner had evaporated. In his place sat the boy who had once come home crying at 10 years old because he had broken his arm falling off his bicycle. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and tears. "Mum," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why? Why did you have to go so far? You destroyed me out there." I set my tea mug down on the counter. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I did not destroy you, Jason, I said softly. I stopped you. There is a difference. I walked around the island and stood near him. "Do you know how I paid for this granite?" I asked, running my hand over the cold stone. "I worked double shifts at Helio Vista for 5 years. I missed 3 of your school plays because I was emptying bedpans and holding the hands of dying patients to pay the mortgage. Your father and I painted these walls ourselves because we could not afford a painter. Every inch of this house is built on my sweat. And then, to hear you tell your friends I am living off you, to hear you say I do not pay rent." Jason flinched as if I had slapped him. The tears finally spilled over, tracking through the sweat on his face. I didn't think about it like that. He choked out. "I just saw... I don't know. I just saw bills. And you were just there. I was there paying the electric bill you screamed about," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I was there cleaning up the beer cans you left behind. I was there cooking dinner when you were too tired." He looked down at his hands. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I knew it, deep down. But, Mom, I was drowning. The startup, it is eating everything. I have credit card debt I didn't tell Brittany about. I felt like such a failure. I am 35 years old, and I am still living with my mother." He looked up at me, his expression full of a desperate, childlike honesty I hadn't seen in years. "I needed to feel like the man of the house," he said, a sob catching in his throat. "I needed to be the owner. If I wasn't the owner, then who am I? Just a guy who can't provide for his wife." So I pretended, and then I started believing it. And when you challenged that, I hated you for it. I felt a pang of sympathy, sharp and familiar. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. But I stayed where I was. "I love you, Jason," I said firmly. "But love does not mean letting you trample on my dignity. And it certainly does not mean letting you become a criminal to soothe your ego." I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal document. It was a spreadsheet Daniel and I had worked on, based on the financial statements I had found in the trash. "This is the reality," I said, sliding it toward him. He looked at the numbers. "Sell the second car," he read aloud, his voice shaking. "Pause the startup for at least 1 year, Mom. This is giving up." "No," I corrected him. "This is growing up. You cannot afford the car. You cannot afford the business right now. You are bleeding money, and you tried to use my house as a tourniquet." I placed a blank sheet of lined paper and a pen in front of him. "If you want to stay, if you want to sign that lease and try to fix this, there are conditions," I said. "First, you will attend financial counseling. Second, you will join a support group for debt management. And third, you will never, ever put this address on a loan application again." Jason stared at the blank paper. He looked at the kitchen walls, then at me. He picked up the pen. His hand was trembling, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't shaking with rage. It was shaking with fear, the healthy fear of consequences. He began to write. It was not a contract drafted by a lawyer. It was a handwritten promise from a son to his mother. "I, Jason Hartman, promised to take responsibility for my debts as I watched him write, the ink flowing onto the page. I knew the battle was over. The house was mine again. But more importantly, I might have just saved my son from himself. 7 days later, the morning air was crisp and cold. Daniel Rhodes stood on my front porch, flanked by a process server. A police cruiser was parked discreetly down the street, its engine idling, just in case things escalated. But there was no shouting today. There was only the quiet, shuffling sound of defeat. Jason had made his choice. In the end, his pride was the one thing he could not mortgage. He could not stomach the idea of signing a lease with his own mother, of admitting that he was a tenant in the kingdom he had claimed as his own. He had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in East Rockridge, a neighborhood where the rents were lower and the streetlights flickered and they were leaving. I stood by the door, watching Jason struggle with 2 large suitcases. He paused at the threshold, his knuckles white against the handle. He looked older than he had a week ago. "We are going," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. I just couldn't sign it, Mom. I couldn't look you in the eye and hand you a check every month. It felt too much like failure. Paying your way is never failure. Jason, I replied gently. It is adulthood. Brittany walked past him, carrying a box of kitchen supplies. She did not look at me. Her head was held high, but her eyes were red. She knew the game was over. "I want to be clear about one thing," I said, stepping forward as they reached the driveway. "Lily is always welcome here. My door is open to my granddaughter, but she will never witness anyone screaming at her grandmother again. That is the new rule." Jason nodded slowly. I know. We will bring her by on Sunday." He picked up the suitcases and walked toward the moving truck they had rented. He hesitated for a second, looking back at the house, perhaps waiting for me to break, to run after him and tell him to stay, that I would fix everything like I always did. I turned my back. I walked into the hallway and stared at the coat rack. I knew if I watched him drive away, I might cry, and if I cried, I might waive the rent, and the cycle would start all over again. I listened to the heavy rumble of the truck engine fading into the distance. Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "The notice to quit has been satisfied," Daniel said, marking a check on his clipboard. "The property is vacant of unauthorized tenants. The trust is secure. You are legally protected. Elise." "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered. An hour later, a locksmith arrived. I watched him work, the metallic scrape of the screwdriver sounding like music. He removed the old brass lock, the one Jason had a key to, and installed a heavy, modern deadbolt. Click. It was not a sound of hostility. It was the sound of a cord being cut. For the first time in 3 years, the safety of my home depended only on me. That evening, the house was warm and smelled of roasted tomato soup and crusty garlic bread. I sat at the dining table, the same table where Jason had tried to broker a fraudulent deal with Nora and Frank. We drank a bottle of red wine that cost $20, and we laughed. "To reclaiming your castle," Frank said, raising his glass. "To paying rent," Nora added with a wink. I smiled, but my heart was quiet. Later, after they had gone, I stood on the front porch. I looked out at the yard. The moonlight silvered the oak tree and the flower beds I had planted 20 years ago. Jason had called this our yard. He had boasted about it to strangers. I ran my hand over the wooden railing. "You said I do not pay rent, so I do not live here." I murmured to the cool night air. I thought about the double shifts. I thought about the missed plays. I thought about the years of silence I had endured to keep the peace. I paid, I thought, answering the ghost of his insult. I paid with my life. I paid with my sweat. And from now on, if anyone wants to live here, they will pay with the one currency you never gave me: respect. I turned off the porch light, stepped inside, and locked the door. For the first time in a long time, the silence in the house did not feel empty. It felt like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please drop a comment below, letting me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.